This hangout on air is live. Yay! Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of Fanning Out. This week we'll be fanning out about comics. Speaking of comics, last night I saw the advanced screening of Guardians of the Galaxy, which
Nice.
was fantastic and seemed to serve no other purpose than to introduce Thanos to the Avengers universe so he can be the bad guy in the third movie, or whenever he's the bad guy.
Yeah.
So, but that's talking about a movie that is based on a comic book. And I don't just want to talk about Marvel, DC, superhero comic books, but all kinds of comic books, including things like Garfield, Hagar the Horrible, Snoopy, Peanuts, and all that. So, I guess what are our earliest memories of comics?
Well, my father was an avid collector for a long time, and so each week he would actually take me to the comic book store with him, and he would let me look around, and I'd look at all the different ones, like all the different ones that are on the shelf, like mostly DC and Marvel, but then you get a few independents here and there, and listen to him talk about the different comics available with his with the guy who was selling them. So it was pretty cool. He did actually buy me my first comic book ever. So
that must be a special memory for you.
yes, and I still remember. Well, it's not the exact first, but it's close. So
What was it?
DuckTales, the movie, the comic book adaptation.
Nice.
And it follows the plot of the movie like exact, and it's awesome. I haven't looked at it in years, primarily just because it's packed away somewhere. So
That's one thing I notice about adaptations from movies to print media. The adaptation is always almost like word for word, scene for scene accurate. So I've got like a comic book of like Ninja Turtles 3, which I had before the movie came out to my local cinema. It was out in the country, it just wasn't at my local cinema. So I read that first and went into the movie knowing exactly what was going to happen. Yeah. So how about you, Matty? What's your foray into comics, if any?
I never really had one. I had one comic book in my entire life, which up until a few years ago I still had lying around somewhere, and it was a Transformers one. Later, it would have been from early 2000s, like literally like the year 2000. There was like zombies and stuff, and it was a bit strange, robot zombies or something, and a lot darker than I was used to. But other than that, as a kid, I had friends who had comics, and I'd read their comics, but nothing really ever stood out for me. Foot Rot Flats, maybe. We call that a comic. It's a comic strip down here. I had some hand-me-downs from Uncle for that one. So.
Did you ever see the movie of Foot Rot Flats?
Yeah, definitely.
That was an interesting movie.
That's one way of putting it.
Personally don't feel captured the essence of the comic.
Yeah, not really. I think there's a lot of themes in that comic that were not really appropriate for film.
Yeah, but also I think that they made it like a cinema-safe movie so to reach a wider audience, which in some ways just alienates your main audience. So my earliest comic purchase was Transformers issue 12, a Marvel publication. And over time, I just forgot about it. I still have it, but the covers come completely off, so it's literally worthless. Then it was many, many years later, I was browsing in the newsagents, and I saw, Transformers, Matrix Quest, episode 5, 6, or whatever it was, and that's one of the most famous Marvel print storylines. That's when I started, and that's what really got me back into comics in the first place, because that was issue like 65 and it stopped at like issue 72. Dave is here. Welcome, David. Dave.
Morning.
Good. Well, morning. Then that run of comics, when I stopped Transformers, I was like, well, what do I go to now? And this was in the comic boom of the 90s when they killed Superman, which just made comic books explode. Everyone was like, we killed Superman. Then everyone really started pumping out their comics, and that was my introduction to the world of comic books. And I got right into that brown cupboard right there is full mostly of X-Men and Spider-Man comics, plus a couple of other Marvel heroes here and there. So, how about you, Dave? What was your first foray into the world of comics?
Well, now I don't know what the sort of situation about comics is in Australia. So, because presumably you've said something about it there that I've then missed. But it was here. It wasn't something that you had a first foray into. It was just a part of life all the time from the start in the UK. You start with comics and you work your way out of them in some people's cases, and then in other people's cases we don't. So, for example, right from the moment you can read, there are comics for you. For very young children. Probably the first comic I ever read would be Buttons, and Buttons was a weekly comic, but it was one of those sorts of comics where you have one character per page, but the characters were people from the very young, like under school age BBC TV programs. So you had Postman Pat and who else was in it? Postman Pat was in it. Henry's Cat. Did you have that in Australia? Henry's Cat?
Oh, I don't know about Henry's Cat. Postman Pat.
Yeah, Postman Pat, though, yeah.
Cat.
Yeah. Did you ever read Buttons, Abby? Who else was in it? Well, it was things like that. It was things that you probably haven't heard of. Mop and Smith was one, which was about just a cat and a dog that this guy owned, and he made a cartoon about, and things like that. And every issue, there would be a little button with a smiley face, and you had to find it somewhere in the issue. It was just hidden, and it taught you to read, and it sort of it didn't get you into comics. That wasn't the purpose, because I don't know how to explain it, but basically there wasn't a divide between children's books and comics. There wasn't that divide the way that we have now. So, I was talking about Raymond Briggs last week. You had the Snowman. That was a silent. That was a silent comic. There was no speech. All comics are silent, but there were no speech balloons in it, or no dialogue in it at all. And you could just read the pictures. So you could read that when you were, 2. There was no youngest age you could read Snowman, and from there you work up. You then at whatever age you can essentially read enough, then you migrate on to things like the Beano and the Dandy. Now you must know them, right?
Beano and the
No. Oh wow! I would be sure that we would have explored those. All right, the Beano and the Dandy were. I mean, you will have heard of stuff from them. Maybe. Well, you might have. They were and are one of them. Again, weekly comics. Again, one character per page, and you just go. If you're at the supermarket, you're at the newsagent, whatever your mum's doing, you get a Beano off the rack, and really, these were things where there's no one in Britain who I would say that to, and they wouldn't know someone from one of those comics. Doesn't mean everyone would have read it, but it's very much part of your culture growing up certainly when I grew up anyway. And you had. We had, for instance, Dennis the Menace. Now, that's a completely different character to the American Dennis the Menace, and came out on the same day. Like, it was a complete coincidence that we came up with the same named character. And ours was this little boy who was badly behaved, and he would, fire, slingshots and things like that. And essentially, everything that Bart Simpson was the day The Simpsons began, Dennis the Menace was when that began. And this was in the 40s or whatever, but it's still going now. And there's loads of other characters like that. And then you had the Dandy, which I didn't read, and I feel guilty about that now, because after 75 years, it actually died a few years ago, because No one cares about this stuff anymore. It's a weird thing that we have this massive cultural mainstay that suddenly no one cares about. And it's been sad to watch. I had a little bit of a rant about it yesterday on Twitter, and I was quite reasonably and quite rightly corrected that I put it as if to say that that children's comics are dying, and that they're just starting to have a bit of a comeback, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And my friend was quick to point out that actually, no, there's plenty of kids' comics, but and he was right, but I was talking about this kind of comic, this kind of weekly, just pick it up at the newsagents, you don't have to go to a comic shop, you don't have to order it online, it's just there as part of normal life kind of comic that we all grew up on. And yeah, the Dandy, and it's been sad to watch the decline of this sort of thing, and I'm sorry to say, because sometimes I can get a bit ranty about this, it was the American comics what did it.
Right.
This is absolutely true. You could get superhero comics, American comics, in the UK, allegedly for most of my life, or all of my life, but I'd never, I promise you, seen them, even to the point where I didn't know that, for instance, Spider-Man was from comics until I was 18. And this is as an active participating fan of comics who now, works in comics without having massively changed what I do, except that now I do it more, I do it visibly.
Yeah.
And what seems to have happened was there were always little, hidden away comic shops in every town, but they weren't very obvious. Like, for instance, I would have been very excited to know where the ones in my towns were, and I didn't even know that such a thing existed. And then the X-Men movie came out, and then the Spider-Man movie came out, and then that was that. Suddenly, not only were American comics visible in the UK, they just killed all our comics overnight. It took a very short time for culture to not really care about the Dandy anymore, and it died, and I think that's really sad. You might, if the rumors are true, if it's not just one big joke, you might soon be introduced to Banana Man, which was one of the Dandy characters.
Oh,
do you know Banana Man?
Yes. Eric
so you had,
eats a banana.
Right, so you had the Goodies cartoon.
We had the Goodies show.
Yeah, that was the yes, Banana Man, as voiced by the Goodies, was the version I know as well. I never saw it in the comics, but it turns out that he's from the Dandy, and he's getting a movie allegedly. So there might be a slight resurgence there. Right. I don't. So that was me. So I didn't have a day where I found comics and got into them, unless you want to go with when I was a teenager and went to university and all this superhero movie stuff happened. No, it was just that they're something that's ingrained into childhood in the UK, or was until the last few years, and now it's kind of gone, and that's sad. But it's coming back. There is a comic called The Phoenix, and you can imagine why it's called The Phoenix, and it's doing this job brilliantly. It's everything a children's comic should be. It's made by all the best cartoonists we have in the UK. It's one of these, loads and loads of different characters in it, but it treats them as stories, so some of them are ongoing, long-running stories, and some of them aren't, and it's just the perfect balance. So hooray for The Phoenix!
Right. Also, being British, you'd be able to answer this question. We had a cartoon here. One of the voice actors was John Pertwee of Doctor Who fame, and that cartoon was Super Ted.
Super Ted.
Did that ever have a comic related?
No, Super Ted was a series of books, and it was Welsh. And I didn't know any of this until my girlfriend, who is Welsh, told me about it. Yes, the original Super Ted books, Spotty Man was not a man, he was a species, and quite a creepy-looking species that they encountered in space. He voiced by John Pertwee. And Super Ted was voiced by a chap called Derek Griffith, who was a similarly, he was nowhere near as big a deal as John Pertwee, but there was no child who didn't know his voice. He was the voice of any number of educational children's programs, including ones that are, the names of which are still on our lips now. And he was a very accomplished sort of singer and musician and so on. And he was the original London stage Lumiere in Beauty and the Beast. Yeah, he was great. So that, and then there was someone else. Who else? There was another voice in. Melvin. What's name was it? Anyway, never mind. Yeah, no, Super Ted wasn't a comic. Super Ted was a series of illustrated books. But honestly, the divide between, children's illustrated books and comics is very small. If you in this sort of book, you would have I think the way the Super Ted books worked was similar to something like the Mr. Men, where you had, a full-page illustration and a little bit of text, either on the opposing page or at the bottom of the page, that sort of thing. And that was how very young children's comics were done. That was how Buttons was done. You'd have a big picture, and then you'd have a little, like 2 lines of writing underneath. Same as with Rupert. And that was just an ordinary standard format that we had here.
Yeah, having grown up in Australia, because Dave, you've grown up in Britain, so your influences are almost entirely British. Zach, having grown up in America, his influences are almost entirely American. Having grown up in Australia, Maddie and I have a mishmash of influences.
So do you not? Is there not, like an Australian comics thing?
We were discussing one earlier. It's actually from New Zealand that had a fairly big cultural impact here, called Foot Rock Flats. They made a motion picture out of it. It's obviously an animated, but yeah, I don't think we ever really cottoned on to, at least in my experience, the comic book culture the way that obviously both sides of the channel over there have.
Yeah.
I don't remember there being a big influx of superhero comics when we were younger.
Yeah.
I certainly don't remember seeing them in the newsagents, and vice versa. I think the most we ever saw of a serialized weekly comic would have been in the newspaper.
Yeah.
When 99% of Australians experience the comic strip is the little 4-panel, and it's pointless. I mean, they still run the Phantom, but every single week it's like a panel of a dude standing in a panel of a tiger, and then a panel of a tree, and then a panel of the Phantom going, "That's what I thought." And that's it, and everyone just goes, "What the heck?"
Really?
But it's still there. It's still every day in the paper, and yeah, I suppose you've got to read the paper every day to know exactly what he was thinking,
Yeah.
Or, and then every now and again they'll open a hilarious one, and it'll be, a tribesman, and then the second panel will be a tree, and the third panel will be a different kind of feline leopard or something, and then it'll be like a female Phantom going, "Oh, darn it, I stepped in it again," or something. Can you just go? But yeah.
So is that like
we get the Megs and that kind of thing? So
was that like an ultra long running story, but there was just
it's still running
4 panels at a time?
Yeah, I mean, who knows whether it's all like every paper's got their own story, or I mean, it's just always been there. It's never not been in every newspaper in Australia.
Yeah.
Phantom comic strip somewhere, 4 panels.
And the other one that's Torcan or something. So he's like a big Hercules kind of a guy. Also, there was another Australian comic called Snake about animals interacting in the outback.
Little Australian animals having like little cracks at each other and innuendo and stuff.
Yeah, and there was another one. I think it was Australian Caveman Ugg, or something like that. There's a book somewhere in the house because I've got like Hagar the Horrible, the collector's edition, which is a color print, and I've got a Garfield one and a Peanuts one, and that one of the Caveman ones. It was a poem about something to do with the toilet. The last line was, "Why would a guy named Crapper call his invention a John?" That was the closing line of the toilet.
That's very
I like that.
That's all there.
Is there an easy Skype-esque way for me to post a link to all of you guys, so that because I've got a very good scan of what a Beano comic looks like that will tell you much about British comic culture.
On your left,
yes.
There is chat at the very top.
There it is.
Yeah.
And There it is. That's what a Beano looks like. That's an open 2-page.
Oh wow!
Oh wow!
Oh, can
Now
I say
those-
getting?
Well, I was just going to say that those would come out every week, and it would be, I don't know how many pages, but plenty of pages. And that was what we had. We just read comics all the time.
Right. I actually was familiar with the British Dennis the Menace through sheer virtue of the fact that my mother is British, and an auntie sent me over some Dennis the Menace, because Mum was like, oh, that's a show he watches, because I was watching the American Dennis the Menace.
Yeah.
So when I get this Dennis the Menace socks and soap pack or whatever it was when I was a kid, I'm like, that's not Dennis the Menace.
Well, do you know why your British relatives made that mistake? It was because over here, the American Dennis the Menace was not called Dennis the Menace. He was renamed to simply Dennis because we had Dennis the Menace. So they would have gone, oh, Dennis the Menace. Okay, there would have been no question of which one you meant.
Right. I see.
Yeah.
So, Dave, you're in the industry. How did it all?
I've dabbled my toes in the industry, and then my girlfriend's actually in it.
Right. So take us through that.
Well, I just make comics all the time, and the funny thing is, nobody knows that yet because I've been doing it offline for years. I've been since I started selling them in 2008, I think, but there's never been a time in my life when what I did wasn't draw comics.
Right.
Because of stuff like this, you know, you read these things when you're a kid, and it's not. I was one of those kids where I didn't realize until really late that things exist because there are publishers and people pay for them, and things are commissioned. I kind of thought that it was like people just randomly draw something and then it finds its way into print. So when I was, 5, 6, 7, I would just be drawing comics, expecting that eventually I'd find them in the shops. And so it never occurred to me that that's not how you should live. Like, if you see some piece of entertainment that you like and that it's within the scope of one person to make that thing, then you should make it. That's what you should do. And I'm glad that I made that mistake because, I ended up spending my childhood making lots of different kinds of things. And that's why, now what people on the internet know I do is like videos and songs and this and that. And that's another thing like that. I just never realized that you shouldn't make as many different things as you can. But yeah, the first thing has always been that I'm a comics making person.
Do you have all of your childhood works in an anthology? Yeah? Safe at the mother's house?
No, not in an anthology. I've got piles and boxes and all sorts of different collections in the flat here. I think I have probably about 70% of all the drawings I ever did here. Which worries me because if there's ever a fire, then I won't leave until I've got them. And then yes, there'll be some back at home. But as it stands at the moment, I'm finally making something for the internet to see. So I've got this big, what will be a webcomic on the go, and it's a retread of the things that I've been selling for the last few years. But they were black and white and grayscale and several years old now. And now I've got a few years behind me. I'm all right. I'm all right at drawing, so I'm making these comics again. They're going to be on the web, and but goodness knows when, because I'm trying to get a good amount of pages done, and then I can start releasing them regularly.
So there's definitely been a resurgence of like Spider-Mans and Batmans and Transformers and this kind of thing since the Marvel Cinema Universe. But how is the indie scene for comic books in the UK and the USA? Because I know it's quite strong here. There's quite a lot of it here. So
yeah, it's great. It's huge. It's huge from my perspective. I can't speak from like what it's like to be what awareness is like on the outside, but because I'm in that world, I know lots of people in the UK who are doing these things because we meet each other at conventions and sometimes Abby, as well as working on. Do you guys know 2000 AD?
Yes.
Right. Well, Abby's a colorist for 2000 AD, and she's just off camera, and you'll hear her now and then chime in. And because of that, and that's like the job she's doing at the moment, but she does various jobs in the industry. But also, she runs a comic shop. She's not the only person who runs this comic shop, but she's there. And as a result of both of those things, we end up meeting all sorts of people from UK comics, including the indie people. It turns out quite a lot of them live here in Manchester. Maybe that's just a skewed viewpoint because I'm here in Manchester, but there's plenty of people here. And maybe that means there's plenty of people in every single town. That's definitely something that's thriving. That's going really, really well. And we've got like some of the top webcomics are from around here. We've got John Allison, who makes Bad Machinery, is from around here. We see him around quite a bit. Tom Sidley does, or Sidell. I asked him once and I can't remember the answer. Who does Gunner Creek Court lives here, and those are. No, I mean here in the UK. Oh, right. He doesn't live here in Manchester. Sorry, yes, no, I should be clear about that. He's from the UK though, so and those are two of the big webcomics. That's two of the biggest webcomics, as far as I can tell. So yeah, it's certainly the webcomics thing, but that's the same as the indie comics thing, you know.
Yeah, same kind of thing. How about the conventions in the USA, Zach?
Oh, in the US you get a lot of like you get some independence if they have like a publishing company that they work through, or they have a booth where it's like, oh, this is published online. But one that I know was a good example is what's the name of that one? I got to look it up really quick. I can always remember the name of one of the characters, but I can never remember the name of the Flipside. That's the name of it. Flipside, which he publishes it online regularly, and then basically, oh, here's basically a selection of chapters. These are a volume. Here it's available for print. And I actually met him he had a booth at Comic-Con last year, and he had a deal where it was, oh, if you buy these certain number, I'll sign them, and then I'll draw a character that you like in the inside cover of the first volume. So there's that, but it's a lot of like if you have a publisher, that's like how to sell them. Like there are certain online companies that do publishing for you. It's mainly online, from what I can tell.
You mean people who make actual physical print publication things?
Yes. I mean, it really depends because it's hard to get picked up by, because over here we're dominated by DC and Marvel and their subsidiaries, but the new rising star is actually IDW.
The guys who do the Transformers comics.
Yes, and as well as they actually I don't have it with me because I actually used to have a bunch of comics sitting here that I would read at night, and unfortunately I put them all away when I cleaned. So like they're doing re-releases of old comics now. The most notable example being Sam Keith's The Max.
Which I saw the cartoon series of that.
Yeah. The cartoon series is actually a really loose adaptation of the original series, but it was published in the early 90s. It was a huge hit, and then it just dropped off the face of the earth.
Right.
And everyone remembers the cartoon over here. Everyone's just like, oh man, the Max was so awesome. The Max was so, like, they used to sell toys in the store of the great big purple guy, the Max, and then it just kind of all disappeared. Under the shadow of DC and Marvel. Well, IDW is now, Sam Keith basically said, hey guys, I'm going to re-release the Max under IDW, and it's going to be like the Max maximized. And it's going to be like recolored artwork, it's going to be, some of the artwork's going to be like cleaned up. So that really helps. But IDW primarily does mostly like TV series comics. I know they do the Transformers, Samurai Jack, Powerpuff Girls, My Little Pony, those, and they're basically, that's their forte. But I mean, independents are primarily online, as far as I can tell over here. I mean, occasionally you'll get the a couple of breakout hits. I know that what was that? Fable, which is released under a different publisher.
Mm-hmm.
But it's primarily dominated by those guys. So.
Does anyone here remember Lady Death?
Yes, I actually did not read it regularly. Mm-hmm. I do know the character. I know some of the history. I actually have I have one issue that I picked up.
Mm-hmm. That I have like a collector's gold embossed print of issue one of the series that they did, because they're all like about 6 issues long, so there are a lot of a lot of issue ones. But that was the first trading card set I ever got in its entirety back, because comic books and trading cards are absolutely huge back then. Also, Dave, getting back to your point of saying that things were that you thought you would draw something and just somehow it would just make its way into the world.
Yeah.
We live in a world now where that can happen, because if you just draw it, you scan
well,
it.
That's it. That's exactly it. Yeah. The thing that the attitude that I had as a kid is now reality, and it's I just think that's such a great thing. You know, anyone can just make a comic, and if it doesn't even I was going to say if it's any good, but it doesn't have to be any good. Like, people will read it no matter what, and I think that's great. It does mean, of course, that we can all make some embarrassing missteps as young teenagers, and I think, you know, there's now this generation that needs to be aware of how stupid they're going to think their old stuff was in 5 years' time, and need to be careful. I was lucky in that I was just the right age that, you know, the stuff I did as a kid. Well, no, actually, I was unlucky, because the stuff I was doing when I was 15 was way better than the stuff that I was doing when I was about 19, and I was able to actually get it online and so on. But never mind that for now. Technically speaking, I'm of the generation that doesn't have that same level of concern that some people do now.
I think it's
also, so we're all going to talk at once there.
Yep.
Matty, go.
I was just going to say that it's interesting that we have all these options, and this is just from the Australian point of view, but the Australian youth had no interest in this DIY, put it out there for the masses. I mean, you know, I'm sure Ian's the same as me, and, you know, we're musicians, and when we were young, same as you, Dave, we were just making things for the sake of making them. And wondering how there's, well, I just did this, and it's almost the same as that, but why is that on the radio and mine's just sitting on the floor in front of, you know, as a 12-year-old kid?
Yeah.
You know, this song I arranged or whatever. But in Australia, the young people, they don't have any get up and go to actually go, oh, I've done this, let's put a video together and edit it and put it up on YouTube. Our YouTube culture is terrible in Australia. We've got a really good indie scene, but we have this, we have a very much help me please culture in Australia, I call it, where we go to the government and go, I've got this really great idea, but I can't do it until you give me something to do it with, like a grant or, you know, some kind of welfare or something like that. And it's the same, you know, there's a lot of these guys that'll be like, well, I've done this comic and it's all here ready to go, but I'm just going to have to wait till someone throws heaps of money at me until I go to the next level. Ian and I went to the local convention a month or two ago with my girlfriend, and the three of us wandered through, you know, where they were, all the indie comic designers and that were, and most of them were pretty lackluster, unimpressive, boring people who just had no get up and go for their product or developing, you know, what they were doing beyond, oh, I did it, and, you know, the bags of money didn't turn up on my door the next day, so, you know, I might, you know, try again next year.
I remember that one girl that, because I was impressed by her artwork, I thought, oh, I like that style. And I asked her, oh, do you do commission works? Her reply was, not really.
Yeah, welcome to Australia. Yeah. Shot down. So I think over here we're definitely suffering, and I think a lot of that comes from, we didn't really have a lot of this when we were young. We didn't have these heroes here, you know, these other authors or these publishing companies that we could look up to and go, I want to work for those guys when I grow up. You know, if you indulged in that kind of thing, you were put off to the side as being a little bit odd. and your parents just hoped that one day you grew up and became a plumber or a mechanic or something. Because there was just no follow through. You know, where do I go? I've done this thing. I want a career in this, but I'm going to have to go overseas if I want to do it, because there's no one here. And I think we suffer a lot for that in Australia.
Well, that's a shame. But what it also means is that it's now available. Whoever it is that wants to step in and take that, the way that, you know, other countries have, can do it and can be really big. Can be the big one. To, you know, the big breakout Australian. Well, I say this in ignorance. Maybe there already is a big breakout Australian webcomic or something like that. But I confess I don't know which one it is. If there is,
I can't imagine there is no.
I don't think there's a big breakout one, but there's probably a lot of slowly crawling up the wall ones, if you know what I mean. Slowly getting their way to the top.
Yeah.
And also, just quickly going back to saying we live in a world where we can do it now. We live in a world where we can do it physically now and sell it at the local conventions. Like, I can go down to my local Office Works or whatever that store is for, you know, a big fancy shop, buy a fancy printer and a fancy thing and proper paper and just print it out, have it folded and stapled nicely, guillotine it so the pages are neat, and sell that at my local markets or get a booth at my local convention.
Well,
So
I mean,
it's
the great thing about being an indie comics person now, and this is why I was able to start working in print and so on, is because you now have all these companies who are like, Vanity Press, and that in the past that was a dirty word. You know, if you were Vanity Press, oh, you're not like a real writer or whatever it was. But now with the web happening and with all of this, everyone's cast that kind of snobbishness out of the window. So. There are companies who you can send them the PDFs of your comic. The main one I'm aware of in the UK is Inky Little Fingers. You send them the PDF, and what you get back is just a 100% professional comic. Like, it is not just indistinguishable from the real thing. It's actually higher quality than most of the comics that you'll see. And we've done that several times, and we don't have any reason to stop doing that at this point. It's affordable and it's beautiful. I mean, the print is better than anything you could do at home. And so, for that, you pay the same price that you would pay to use the photocopier at the local corner shop or something. You know, it's not expensive. And so, I mean, unless you get into a really lavish color print or whatever. But it means that people can make these books for great prices, get a big stack of them, bring them over to a convention and sell them, and have a professional-looking product. So people who come in who aren't aware of this, you know, customers who come in and aren't themselves in the indie comic scene are looking around going, how have they done this? This is really high quality. And of course, that inspires some sales. It's a good thing.
Zach, were you going to say something earlier?
Actually, I lost my train of thought.
I'm curious as a non-comic book reader, ever. Exactly what is the attraction of the comic book?
It's like reading with less words. What did you say, Zach?
I think the best way I've heard it described was by the couple years back. I was watching a Nostalgia Critic video, and he basically said that comic books, like superheroes in general, were like our Greek myths. They were basically these fantastic stories that, as the way I look at it personally, is that they're basically kind of like a different type of storytelling, but they're a bit more fantastic than like most books that are out there. Like, they go beyond what we would expect. Like Superman travels to other worlds, or Spider-Man saves New York and the world from these horrible scientific monstrosities. But at the same time, some of them can be rooted heavily in reality. I do know that the Captain America comic was originally created as World War II propaganda.
How'd that work out for you?
Well, they actually featured an issue of Hitler getting punched by Captain America. So it was basically, it's actually like one of the most iconic images of Captain America is him punching Hitler in the face.
Wow.
And it was all propaganda. It was the whole like propaganda machine for the war. Was like, we need a character that will like sell the idea of America and all that. So they were just like, okay, Captain America. And it worked up until he got shot. So he got shot, and then he got shot in one iteration. He passed down his title to another character. He got frozen in ice for one iteration, which is the most commonly accepted story arc. He went to war with Iron Man over should superheroes have identities or not, reveal their identities to the world or not.
Oh, that was just a couple of years ago, wasn't it? Now.
Yeah, Civil War.
Yeah,
Civil War.
I remember that. Well, I say a couple of years ago. I'm sufficiently old that it's probably like 7 years ago, and it just feels like.
And he was resurrected as a zombie and had to fight Bruce Campbell.
Great.
In the Army of Darkness Marvel Zombies crossover.
I reckon there's something else. I think that's completely true. I think the American the superhero comics are definitely that. They are the modern Greek myths. And they have all the hallmarks of that. You know, they are an ongoing story. People can like yourself can sort of recite back. Well, then this happened, and then this happened. You know, same as with someone can do that with the Greek myth characters. Comics as a wider medium, though, I think it's simpler than that. I think at least this is what it was to me. First off, it's a cartoon, but you don't have to be watching the TV to have it. And the oldest, fustiest members of your family are happy for you to be reading comics, even when they're not happy to be glued to the TV. And then the second thing, which, and this is going to be obvious when I say it, is that it feels like you can make it yourself. It feels slightly participatory. Yes. At least not the superhero comics, because they're too well drawn. They're so well done that you feel like I now look at them and go, there's nothing in common between me and what they can do. Whereas you look at the Beano, and that's brilliantly drawn as well, but it has this personal look to it that makes you think, yeah, I can do that. Even when you're a little kid and you start and you can make things like that. And that's I think where a lot of UK cartoonists have come from is from just feeling like this is something we can all muck in on. It's something a person can do, and there's something appealing about that.
Yeah. Well, I remember
kind of like YouTube culture. Like YouTube culture, that's one person, one camera, and it makes you feel like, yeah, I'll do that. And here we are doing it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I remember sitting in class, and like the teacher was just like, "Oh, like sit and draw or whatever." And a couple of my friends, we draw stick figure comics. They were ridiculous, over the top. I think one of them was like a stick figure driving a tank, and his little stick figure friend was running in front of him, and he tripped.
And the tank ran over him. Yeah.
And so
also,
there was that, but
yeah, go.
No, but yeah, that whole I do have to agree that participatory nature, because we were all inspired because we were all reading, like I was at least at that point when I was 11 or 12 starting to read the Sunday comics, which is I'm not sure how it is overseas, but the Sunday comics is basically an entire 4-page in the paper where it's just different comic strips or different characters. I know the longest running over here is Peanuts.
Yeah, but he finished that when Charles M. Schultz died. He thought, okay, because he could have signed it off to someone else, and someone else could have continued the legacy. He was like, oh, that's it. I'm finishing this off, getting all my things, and now you can actually buy the complete works.
Wow.
And in fact, now in the newspaper, it's just called Classic Peanuts.
Those books
are
beautiful. The hardback collections. I love the hardback collections of that kind of thing. The old newspaper strips. I haven't got the Peanuts ones, but they're very pretty. But I have got the Mickey Mouse one. Because that Mickey had a different life in comics as alongside the cartoons. And again, beautiful books, hardback and really beautifully designed. And the Popeye ones are the same thing again.
No, I know that I actually have we have a couple here. The they're little paperback booklets to preserve the size and scale of the original comics. They're about like that big.
Yeah.
And it's the Far Side comics by Gary Larson.
Oh, yeah.
Which those I remember I was 8 years old. My dad and I are reading these like under a book lamp at night because he worked all day, but he was basically okay. I'm going to like enter to like read with my kids and do all that. So we'd sit and read Far Side comics, and so that way we could both. He could have a laugh at the end of a hard day, and I could have a laugh as an 8-year-old kid because they were the most hilarious thing I ever saw at that point. And then I also have one of my own is the Garfield comics.
Yeah.
Which it's just like a little booklet, but it actually has the very first Garfield comic ever published. And nothing much has changed except halfway through the book, the art style shifts dramatically.
Yeah, the way he used to draw Garfield was completely different, wasn't it? Really fat and dangly and stuff. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, halfway through the book, like John the Human, all of a sudden his face starts to change a little bit. Garfield his head starts to become a little bit more round instead of like pudgy cheeks. And Odie stayed the same for years, so I haven't noticed any change. And then the other one we have is, I know a big one, at least it shaped how I viewed comics, was Calvin and Hobbes. Which is just beautiful, and they actually have released a full collected, like the complete Calvin and Hobbes, which is a beautiful short, which is a beautiful story about a kid and a stuffed tiger.
Since we're on camera, shall I go and get it?
Yes, we shall.
Hold on a sec.
Right. Also, just getting back to your question, Maddie, about what you were asking about what is the appeal. For me, I'm a very visual person, so when I read a book, just an ordinary, like a novel, to me there's very little visual stimulus. I'm just seeing words. To me, a book is like reading the audio tape, because I don't really visualize it. I just see the words and I hear the words in my head rather than seeing the pictures the words are trying to describe. So with a comic book, I actually see what's trying to describe, and just the text, what the characters are saying, is written.
Here it is. Look at that.
Oh my lord!
Isn't that pretty? The complete Calvin and Hobbes.
Yes.
In these wonderful leather-bound. Well, I don't know if they're leather-bound. Yeah, I do. They're not. Lovely hardback books. They feel leather-bound. That's the kind of books they are. You know what? I've had these for years, and I've never read them because they're too precious. I need to start.
Yes.
Crack them open and read them properly.
That's an impressive little what would you call that? I mean, it's a collection, but there's got to be a better word.
Anthology, as you said before.
Anthology. There we go.
Yeah. Is there another word? Oh, we'll stick with anthology.
Anthology's good, yeah.
Yeah. All that really means is complete collection, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. That describes it. I mean, and that's what we have now. People now, I think there's this new respect for, like, which we used to have. There's this new respect for the actual art, because things like Calvin and Hobbes, even though everyone agrees it was brilliant, because of its sort of literally throwaway nature, because it would come out in newspapers and you'd read it and then you literally throw that away. People kind of for years have thought that that's where that sort of thing belongs, and now there's this sense of no, this is art, let's collect it, it's good. So there's the Calvin and Hobbes one. I'm getting these. The Smurfs anthology books are just starting to come out. And the Smurfs was originally, that was a comic as well, and like, I don't know if I can really demonstrate it here, but they were drawn really well. And the guy who does it, called Peo, was, he was on par with any of the other sort of European artists at the time, like doing Tintin and Asterix and that sort of thing. And I've never had the opportunity to really read these before. I've never read them before, and now they're coming out in these hardbacks, and it's just fantastic.
one that they started actually. It's still ongoing, but they're actually starting to release like anthologies of. Here, one of my personal favorites is Pearls Before Swine.
Never heard of it.
It's
like a
basically
bad porn name.
it. Some panels. It's a more adult-based humor comic. It runs in the Sunday paper, but it had basically it's the story of rat, pig, goat, and their neighbor alligators that all have these really weird accents, and the zebra. And it's basically their day-to-day lives of how pig and goat are honest, hard-working animals, and rat is a con artist who has tried to make it big doing everything. And in fact, one of the best ones was essentially it starts out as a picture book where it just says like Dan the donkey was sad. Dan the donkey got mad. Dan the donkey went to the bar and had a drink, and then he had more and more, and he got into a car with Mrs. Something. And then as it turns out, Mrs. Something's husband was a professional MMA fighter, gold champion of the world fighter. And then it just says, Dan the donkey died many times that night. And it just cuts to Rat sitting at his desk. He's got like a 5 o'clock shadow going. And he's got, you can see an ashtray filled with cigarette butts. And Goat just saying like, this is your idea of a children's book? And Pig just goes, it teaches an important lesson. And then Pig just like Pig shouts random stuff occasionally that it relates, but at the same time it doesn't. He just goes like, this is like, never trust strangers at a bar, or something like that. And it's basically Rat has always tried these schemes, and occasionally they do break the fourth wall, where it's the actual artist who draws himself as the character that interacts with these with Rat, Goat, Pig, and they actually call him lazy throughout. Every time he appears, they're just like, "Can't you figure out how to do something better with your time?" And he's just like, "No, I love my job." And in fact, at one point, he actually got into contact with the guy who did Calvin and Hobbes, because he cracked a joke in one of his Sunday strips, which was it was just all about him, and they basically said, as a comic book artist, have you ever used your status as and basically someone, like one of the animals was asking him if you ever used this comic book artist status or comic artist status as a way to pick up women. And and he goes, well, there was this one time, and it shows him in a bar with this woman, and she just goes, so what do you do for a living? Oh, I draw comic strips. Oh, anything I've heard of? And he just goes, and he's sitting there, and he's like, ... You ever heard of Calvin and Hobbes? And then it cuts to him sitting in bed with her, and he's just like, I will, and he's just like, it's just like the look on his face is just like, oh my god, that worked. And apparently the creator of Calvin and Hobbes saw that, thought it was hilarious, and basically said, hey, I actually thought this was kind of funny. You want to like get together sometime? And the guy literally like posted a reply, I think in like one of the panels, where he's just like, you have no idea what this is like. But he did. But yeah, it's hilarious. I find it hilarious just because it's all about these just random little characters and their day-to-day lives, as it makes sense in their own little world. Like the alligators are continually trying to get the zebra to let him be eaten.
Mm-hmm. And what was the name of this comic? Sorry,
Pearls Before Swine.
Right.
Like these two alligator neighbors of the zebras basically say, hey, like, could you come help us move this heavy piece of furniture? And he's like, is this just one of your schemes trying to eat me? And he goes, no, of course not. Now just climb into this cooler. And so it's just like random little things like that. They did one recently where it was Rat at a bar, and the Grim Reaper is sitting next to him. And he just goes, "What are you doing here? Are you here to collect my soul?" And he goes, "Oh, not for a while. I'm here to meet Pig for lunch." And he just goes, "Well, do you want to call him?" He's like, "Oh, it's okay. I got a cell phone." And he goes, "It's got one of those like text to talk things." He goes like, "Call Pig," and it just like says like, "Please say again, call Pig home. Please say again, call Pig home." And you see Pig standing next to him, just like mortified. And the next panel is him passed out on the floor, and he just goes, "Perhaps I should have worded that differently."
It's a good segue, though, adult comics, into, I guess, where any discussion on comics is going to eventually go, which is the influence and the I forgot the word, but the anime, manga, the Japanese influence, because I know in Australia that's much stronger here. I moved from Brisbane, which is one of our capital cities, to Port Macquarie, where I met Ian about 5 years ago. And Brisbane's, a large city. Port Macquarie is a beach city that's got, 30,000 people in there. And I nearly fell over when I walked into the local library, and there was no comic book section, but there was an enormous manga section with complete collections of all kind of esoteric storylines, not just your standard Dragon Ball Zs and Death Notes, but all of these other things that, I just never even considered such a small area would have. But that is definitely bigger here in Australia than anything else.
The funny thing is, manga has really influenced, I think anyway, this isn't coming, I haven't done any academic study on this, but just as life rumbled along, I think that manga has influenced what has happened with webcomics and with indie comics in general. And it didn't need to. There are various things that could have had that same influence. So, for instance, our British comics could have done the same thing. So, like, the ideas that I already had and that various other people in the UK had from those, but that weren't popular, have now become popular ideas thanks to manga, which is this idea of, like, a comic can be made by one person, which isn't really true of manga, because a lot of the manga artists have people working under them, but it feels authored. The idea of long-running stories, the idea of not having to be about just one thing or one topic. Various and the fact that it's perfectly all right to make a black and white comic, for instance. It doesn't have to be color to work. I think a lot of these ideas have sort of come across from manga. See, I think what manga did, and same with anime, is that is what we were talking about last week. That thing where we were talking about anime and how people went, well, I'm too old for cartoons, but I still like them. Well, I think the same thing has happened here with comics. So, like, a lot of people, not exactly the same thing, but a lot of people have gone kind of, when it became big, when manga became big, it was kind of on the back of this, it's different. Do you know what? Honestly, I'm going to say very similar things to what I said last week, so I'll try not to. But it's a very similar thing, and so as that has sort of risen and that found its way into bookshops because of how popular it is, what's rubbed off is the very concept of long-running authored comics, and that has definitely rubbed off on. I mean that. Half the internet is into that already, and so webcomics naturally is built on that. In fact, it's amazing that they're not all, copied from manga, because that's such a big influence on the internet that you'd think it would be. It's quite interesting that there's as much variety as there is, honestly. Now, I mean, of course, there's variety within manga as well, but as we know, the internet takes all of manga and anime, consolidates it into a couple of styles, and and draws like that, as it were. And so it's cool. I think all of the right influences have been taken from manga. The idea that, as the famous image is that, in Japan, comics are a part of normal life, and then you'll always have, or at least until a few years ago, someone will always say, businessmen read phone book-sized comics on trains on the way to work. And that is a beautiful image, and I don't know how true or not it is. But it's
pretty true.
Yeah?
Yeah,
it's certainly Great. Well, that's great because it certainly illustrates like this idea of comics for everyone as part of normal life. And yeah, that if only we can have that. You know, we're clearly working towards that, and we're nearly there. You know, comics have become quite normalized again now. And you know, you go to a Comic-Con now here. Anyway, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but you go to a Comic-Con here, and they're not. When I started in 2008, and I was already going to Comic-Cons before that just as a guest, and when I started doing that when I was a teenager or 20 or whatever age I was, Comic-Cons were like a few people would show up, and they would be you know. There would be a few people. I mean, loads of people would show up, but they would be real hardcore sci-fi fans and things like that. And then now everyone shows up. It's just a local event that anyone can go to. Talking about Zach, talking about Comic Cons and things like that, and how comics are becoming a normal thing that aren't like outlying. Like there's culture and comics are over there, which is where we were for a while in that early uprising of American comics in the UK, and presumably it feels like that's how they always were elsewhere. What I don't understand. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think in Australia we've always had, we never had that a foundation that something has come and had an influence on. I think we've always just been a little ball sitting here in the middle with everybody taking little pot shots at us. You know, so we've always had a little bit of this.
Dave, you were going to say one thing you don't understand
is why in America, and this is going to be a slightly ignorant statement because obviously I don't live there, but it seems to me that when people say comics in America, they mean Marvel and DC and the things you know, similar to that. And what I don't understand, but what I don't understand is why the newspaper strips aren't involved in that image, because here I think they are more. I think anything that's a series, anything that's a comic, it was thought of as a comic here, whereas in America it was just like, well, Marvel and DC, that's comics, and then there's comic strips, which is like newspapers, or that's a separate thing.
I might have an answer. It's probably incorrect, but growing up here in the States,
yeah,
I do know that, like, I go into actually the local bookstore, and they actually have comics out front, like Marvel, DC, Batman, Spider-Man.
Right.
And it's much more. Those are much more advertised.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of marketing. Like, I do know that the one bookstore that used to sell a lot of comics before it shut down because the whole company went under, and they were partially responsible for a huge manga boom in the early 2000s, at least in the U.S., because it wasn't a thing yet. But then the CEO of the company said, you know, this is a type of reading. This is actually a reading material that is very popular in other countries. Why don't we bring it here too?
Yeah.
And that helped, and then all the other stores copied him.
So it's about visibility, and I guess Marvel and DC probably essentially paid to rewrite, you know, people's imagination of like what a comic is.
Yes.
to it's us.
Yes, and actually in the 90s there was actually a whole conflict with the major companies, one of which being primarily the Marvel and DC. There was a huge feud going on between them, and then within the company themselves, there was a feud between employees about rights and ownership. I know this primarily because I have a friend who researched this for a class he took.
Yeah.
Excuse me a minute. I got a bloody nose, so I'll be right back.
Okay. Just getting back to your actually, one point Zach was having there, Marvel and DC would have the clout and money behind them to be able to pay comic book stores. We will pay you to have our posters in the window and no one else's.
Exactly.
Yeah. That sounds like it is I should have thought of that before, because there's so much about sort of American culture is who paid to be visible. But that sounded rude. I'm not disparaging Americans there, but there is a sense that well, we have the money, so we are comics, as it were. Now, but I think that's absolutely, and I think a similar thing happened here, because here our comics, we didn't get our comics from comic shops, and we didn't get our comics from bookshops. We got them from the same places we got our newspapers. Now, I hear that in America as well. You hear the newsstand as being like the place that comics were purchased. Here, if you went to buy a paper, you'd have the paper, and still now you have the same setup. You got the papers, you got the magazines, and you got the comics. And in those days there were more comics, and the comics that were there were more comicsy than they are now. Now you have things that are like a children's magazine that's got lots of puzzles and things, and then a couple of comics in them.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's where we got it from, and so we kind of. So what I mean is, the comics and the newspapers with comic strips in, you literally bought them in the same place in the shop. So I guess that's how we ended up thinking of them as the same thing. And of course, things from France and Belgium and things are things like Asterix and Tintin. They were newspaper comics as well. They just had a much more interesting, in my opinion, sort of newspaper comic culture. And so now we think of those as books.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, getting back to your talk about conventions, I remember years and years ago there was a comic convention here in Australia. It was only in Sydney. It was called OzCon, OZCON. And I went to the second one. I went to every single one from the second one onwards, and I even saw it to death. To the point where people still tried to revive it by having something like it every year. But back in those days, in the mid-90s, it was very much predominantly teenage males.
Yes.
And that's it. It wasn't sort of until the death of that. Now we have a new one called Supernova, which Maddie was talking about earlier. Because OzCon was strictly comic books. Your Marvels, your DCs, and your Indies. Whereas Supernova is all of pop culture. Your comic books, your anime, your manga.
And I might just insert there that it's all of commercial pop culture. So it's your big top tier Marvels and Transformers and your higher level computer games. There's actually not a lot of indie culture there. So, but that's definitely how they've survived.
We've got something somewhere in between, and I think a lot of comics people are unhappy about this, the way that comic conventions have become general marketing and pop culture conventions. But I think that the plus side to it, and I think it's a very strong plus side, is that people who wouldn't be interested in comics at all are now starting to think of them as things that you get along with pop culture, things as part of that. And so we're in the quite pleasant situation where people will come to a convention to meet celebrities, and they'll come to it to play games that aren't out yet and things like this. And then what will happen is, as they wander around, they'll find the comics area, and there we all are, and that's your sort of there's quite a sort of grassroots feel to that bit, and people see it as a breath of fresh air from all of the marketing they've just been hit with. So they'll go, oh great, people are doing this as well, I'll have that, and they'll try out your stuff. And so that's all part of this normalizing effect of like bringing comics back into just what people think of as normal culture, which they were there.
And I think that's partly because the teenagers that did it back when I was doing it, these days they've grown up with families, and like Zach, they've brought their kids up on it. Yeah. And some of them may be only just old enough to have grandkids, so it's just becoming norm because each generation is being brought up on that same thing more and more.
Yeah.
And as you said earlier, Dave, these days Supernova is just like an annual event you take your family to.
Yeah.
It's like the Easter show or something like that. It's a done thing.
That's right. Yeah.
If I remember correctly,
Sorry, go on.
just speaking of grandparents, if I remember correctly, when I was getting into Superman, I know I sound really funny right now with this thing shoved on my nose.
Go ahead.
I apologize for it. It's dry here, and I have like something weird. It's a confluence of happy coincidence.
Okay.
That actually, my grandmother, when I told her I was really into Superman, my grandmother said, "Oh yeah, I used to read that comic."
Mm-hmm. Oh, you were into like the Superman movies.
No,
I
the
see.
cartoon show, and I had read a couple of the comics, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I read the comic back when it was published."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And she watched the original 1940s cartoon.
Oh,
So,
I've seen
and
some
so
of that.
I was like, and
The
so
Fleischer
it was
ones.
weird. Yeah. And so it was just kind of, I never thought of it until just bringing that up, like grandparents, because my grandmother, I'm just like, my grandmother read Superman? And I was just kind of like,
yeah, it was.
Yeah,
these things are sufficiently old now that they are.
Yeah.
There isn't a generation alive that doesn't know Superman. You know.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I guess that's like the normalcy of it is just that like how normal it was back then to like you said, like I know that back in those days you did buy your newspaper and then there'd be the Action Comics number whatever next to the newspaper and you'd
Yeah.
like I'll pick this up, it's the New York, I'll pick up this for me, and then Timmy did good on his test today, I'll pick this up for him.
Yeah.
Or
well, the thing about the 1940s Superman cartoon, which we've got on DVD, I haven't seen all of it, but it's brilliantly animated. Like it's ridiculous. It's very good. Those you didn't, that's kind of the sort of thing I'm talking about. You didn't have to seek those out in the same way that comics in the newspapers and so on. You saw the Superman cartoon by going to watch a film, and they would just be on playing with that. And you didn't have to get... And this is how Popeye got so big, and Mickey Mouse, and all these things. You just went to see a film, there was the cartoon, and of course in those days it was still the equivalent of exciting new technology to see cartoons at all. And so you'd just be like, oh, look at that, what a strange spectacle. And
it was more introductory, and that it was out there. It wasn't like the secluded thing that it's become, but at the same time it's very out there, but in a different. It was more out there in the exposure that I remember my grandfather, God rest his soul, I remember talking to him and he goes, I saw this because he actually bought the VHSs of these old serials.
Mm-hmm.
And and what happened with him was he said, back when I was a kid, you paid 15 cents, you got to see 2 shows, a cartoon, you got a bucket of popcorn and a pop. And he said, that was my theater when I was a kid. And so I never, I never thought that we said, cartoons. He goes, yeah, Looney Tunes. Like he said, they showed Looney Tunes to us. They showed Disney, the first Disney cartoons to us in the theater. And then the old, these old cartoons. And that was just part of it. Like, you'd see the newsreel. And then, our feature presentation will begin in a few minutes. You'd see a Goofy cartoon.
What I don't understand is why they've stopped pushing that. Because surely it would be in the corporate interest of companies like DreamWorks and Disney to have those shorts showing before films now. I'm really not sure why they don't do it.
I
mean, they probably do with some.
Ad space.
Wait, you all spoke at once.
Sorry.
I'd say it's ad space because when I go to see a movie now, it's literally you show up 30 minutes prior.
Yeah.
They start showing ads, and it's ads for upcoming shows.
Yeah.
It's basically like watching. It's basically the all commercial channel until the movie starts.
Yeah.
Yep.
And once in a while you'll get a rare movie where it's I know Pixar loves to do this, and some of the Disney movies where you get you get the ads, and then all of a sudden the trailers, and then all of a sudden a Pixar short before the movie.
Yes. That I love that, and I wish, and it can't happen, and I know why it can't happen. I wish that whoever is because all the film studios have got an animation division now. Sony's got one, and Fox has got one, and has Fox got one? Yeah, I think they have. And if you, I feel as if whatever company is making the film, they should put a sort of, it doesn't have to be a cartoon, but some kind of animated, some kind of interesting thing before it. But I think the other reason they don't, yes, it's ad space is one of them, and the advertisers are going to pay more if they can be closer to the film because then more people are likely to have sat down in time to see it. But the other thing is that, frankly, people just... It's the way cinema works now. In the old days, when you had the cartoons in the middle, not only could you see 2 films, but you could just stay sitting there and see the films again. It would just run round and round and round, and people would come in and out.
Right.
And they would know what time it was on, and they would try and come in and watch the film, but you could just wander in the middle and stay, and then watch the beginning of the film later, and just sit there. And so, but now, people have we're just busier. We're just, our time is, we're hammered with this idea that our time is like, no, you must be here and do this and do this.
Yes.
So now when we see a film, we set aside a rare few minutes to watch a film. So we sit down and we're like, come on, start, come on. And we don't want to sit through, the only time we want to sit through a cartoon is if that's what we're already there for. And presumably there are lots of people who get annoyed at the Pixar shorts because they're like, come on, I want to watch this film, even though,
the Pixar shorts are very entertaining. And we've gone completely off topic, but this is an excellent segue into next week's topic, which is movies. And then, so will we all be... I think we've talked enough about comics for now. We can probably...
I have one more point.
Yep, go.
I just want to... talking about the way we used to present moving comics. Let's call them moving comics instead of cartoons. Stay on topic.
Okay.
And I've experimented with this myself, but app culture and comics. I know app culture in Australia is terrible because of our incredibly overpriced internet services, but has there been any kind of a wave of comic book app culture in either the UK or the USA? I've tried one. It's side scroll through, it's virtually just a PDF. But time constraints and with the new technology, is this something we can expect to see more of?
I think so. There's certainly... Now, I don't read a lot of these, but I know that you can get Marvel comics and DC comics and things that it's not just like reading a PDF. It's like you tap it and it'll zoom in on each panel one by one and things like that. So people are playing with that, but it isn't launching off. Like the physical print comics are still very much the main ones, I think. But there are some. There are some, like the Phoenix, you can get digitally. There's something called Moose Comics, which is, a kind of a tribute to things like the Beano that I was talking about. I hope that's just a pilot issue now, but I hope it takes off because that's digital. So yeah, it's happening. It's just a little bit. Nothing has solidified like this is the one yet.
We haven't got a Zuckerberg of the online comic app community yet, do we?
Well, there's Comixology.
Comixology.
Yeah, that's close. It's like a kind of an think of it as the iTunes of the comics, basically.
Okay.
I know that. Yep. I know that. Just two quick things. I know that on the digital comics, I have a friend who goes to university with me in graduate school, and he loves the My Little Pony comics, the newest ones that have been coming out. And
I hear they're good.
I have a couple of print issues. They are dark, like for a early kids comic book. They are surprisingly dark and intimidating at points. To the point that they actually did reference the Temple of Doom. They actually referenced Temple of Doom, and they had the actual priest of Kali appear as a short cameo in this Castle of Horrors. But he actually buys it digitally through iTunes. Yeah. And so it's basically like the digital download.
Yeah.
So I know that's becoming a huge...
Well, iPads are a good thing to read comics on. They're not perfect. They're slightly the wrong aspect ratio, and they're not quite right, but as tablets become a normal... Well, they have become a normal thing, and so there's alternatives now. So, tablets are a very attractive thing to read comics on. It's just not quite exactly perfect yet, but I think it will be soon.
I want a comic book app that does the same thing that Google Playbooks does, that when you turn the page, it gives you a page-turning animation.
I think they do.
Yeah.
Right.
And the smell.
I'll have to look up the app that does that, because the apps I have at the moment is just swipe. You just swipe from page to page.
Well, there's something now. There's a problem that webcomic creators have with. There are various apps through which to read webcomics. The problem is that means that you don't see their adverts, their banner ads, and so they don't make money off it. There's one which I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe does give them the ad revenue, which is called Comic Rocket. Now, if I'm right about that, or if the thing I read about it was right about that, then what that does is it allows you to, you pick the webcomics you like, you put those into the list on your app, and then you play the bass in the background.
Sorry.
And what you do is then you've got a list of all your webcomics. So rather than having to go to the website and read them, you can thumb through them on your app. So that takes things. I feel like that's the direction things will go in, but it has to go in a way that allows the creators to get some kind of ad revenue or some other kind of compensation. Otherwise, they won't be happy about it.
Can I just
it's a big hurdle for app culture.
But say that again, sorry, Matthew.
That's the biggest hurdle for app culture in general, and all online content is monetizing it. How do we get rebated for this?
Yeah. I'm just on Comixology right now, and for a digital purchase, these prices are atrocious. This is what you would pay for a physical copy.
Yes.
That's the main thing I hate about digital purchases. People don't get it. It's like, no, I'm not going to pay you the same money for a bunch of zeros and ones that I'm going to pay you for a physical hard copy that I can actually own.
Well, the thing about Comixology is that I presume what you're looking at there will be Marvel Comics or whatever. But indie people can put their comics on there as well, and they can name their own price. So there are some more reasonable prices in that sphere. But they take a big cut, as I understand. So
okay. I might have to look into getting drawing lessons then. Right. And on that note, we'll call it quits for this week. Dave, will you be joining us next week for movies?
Sure. Yeah, I like this. I like this new thing of getting up in the morning. I think I may have to just say, look, I'm not going to be there until an hour in, because again, it's not happening. But yeah, I like being up in the morning on Sundays for a change.
Okay, all right. Thank you, David, Maddie, and Zach, and I'll see you all again at roughly the same time next week.
Same channel.
Yeah, we need a same bat time. We need a sign off. Anyway. Okay, bye everyone.
Bye.
See ya.